She was the pride of Chicago's elite medical world. Brilliant, fearless, unstoppable. But in a single, shattering night, Dr. Marcela Martinez lost everything. Betrayed by the hospital she bled for and cast into the cold with nothing but a broken spirit. Marcela now wanders the icy streets, a ghost of the woman she once was. Until he finds her, a mysterious stranger with secrets of his own, and a past just as haunted. When he drags her back from the edge of death, neither of them knows they're about to ignite a chain of events that could expose a deadly conspiracy buried deep in the city's core. What begins as an unlikely alliance becomes a race for truth, survival, and redemption. Because sometimes, your worst enemy is the only one who can save you. If powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption move you, hit that like button. It helps more people discover love stories worth telling. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love connecting with you. And be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Because every story I share is chosen to make you feel something real. The snow fell like broken dreams across Chicago's unforgiving streets. Each flake was a reminder of how quickly life could turn cold. Marcela Martinez huddled on a frozen bench outside Union Station, her breath creating small clouds that disappeared as fast as her hopes had. She was only 31, but the world had aged her beyond her years. 6 months ago, she had been Dr. Marcela Martinez, a rising star at Chicago General Hospital. Now she was nobody, just another shadow in a city that didn't care. The expensive coat she once wore with pride now hung in tatters. Her medical degree meant nothing when powerful people wanted you destroyed. They had taken everything, her license, her savings, her future, all because she dared to tell the truth. Marcela's hands shook as she pulled the thin fabric tighter around her shoulders. The cold bit through to her bones, but the emptiness inside hurt worse. She had lost more than her career. She had lost herself. Just survive tonight, she whispered to the darkness. But deep down, she wondered if she had any fight left. 3 blocks away, Martins Thompson sat in his black Mercedes, the engine running warm against the bitter cold. At 37, he was one of Chicago's most feared defense attorneys. He fought for people the system had crushed. Workers cheated by their bosses, families destroyed by corporate greed. Tonight, he was driving home from another late meeting when his headlights caught something that made him slow down. A small figure sat hunched on the station bench, shivering in the storm. Something about her stopped him cold. She didn't look like the usual homeless people he saw on these streets. Even through her torn clothes, there was something different about her. Something that said she hadn't always been here. Martins felt a pull he couldn't explain. He had a big trial tomorrow. He should go home. But instead, he pulled over and stepped into the freezing night. Marcela looked up when she heard footsteps, her dark eyes wary and tired. "I don't need help," she said, but her voice was so weak the wind almost stole it away. Martin stopped a few feet back, careful not to scare her. "You won't make it through this storm," he said gently. "It's too cold." Marcela tried to stand, but her legs gave out. The world spun, and darkness reached for her. "I'm fine," she mumbled as she collapsed. Martins caught her before she hit the ground. Her pulse was weak, her skin ice cold. Without thinking twice, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to his car. He cranked the heat up full blast and drove toward his office building, where he kept a small apartment for late nights. As he looked at her pale face in the rearview mirror, Martins made a choice that would change both their lives. He wasn't going to let her die alone in the cold. Marcela woke up in a strange place, warm for the first time in weeks. The soft yellow light from a desk lamp made her blink hard. She was lying on a real bed with clean sheets and warm blankets. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming. "Where am I?" she whispered, her heart racing with fear and confusion. "You're safe. came a deep voice from the corner. Marcella turned to see a tall man with kind brown eyes and dark hair. He looked tired but concerned, not threatening. "I'm Martins Thompson," he said, staying where he was so she wouldn't feel trapped. "I found you at the station. You passed out from the cold." Marcella's mind raced. She wasn't used to trusting strangers, not after everything that had happened. "I need to go," she said, trying to get up. But her body was too weak, and she fell back onto the bed. "You're not strong enough yet," Martin said firmly but kindly. "I called a doctor. Stay here tonight, at least until you feel better." Marcella shook her head, her eyes flashing with stubborn pride. "I don't need pity," she said coldly, though her voice shook with exhaustion. Martins didn't argue. He just went to the small kitchen and brought her a cup of hot soup. "This isn't about pity," he said quietly. "It's just too cold to be outside tonight." A doctor came and checked her over. Mild hypothermia, but she would be okay with rest and warmth. After he left, Marcella sat holding the soup, torn between gratitude and shame. "Get some rest," Martin said before he left the room. "You're safe here." When the door closed, Marcella was alone with her thoughts. She pulled the blanket over her head and tried not to cry. "Just tonight," she told herself. "Then I'll find a way to leave." But for the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Morning light crept through the windows as Marcella woke up in the small room. Her body felt stronger, but her heart was heavy with shame. She didn't want to owe anyone anything. She had learned that accepting help always came with a price. Marcella folded the blanket neatly and got ready to leave. She would thank Martins and disappear before she became a burden. But when Martins knocked on the door with coffee and breakfast, he could see what she was planning. "You're leaving this early?" he asked without judgment. Marcella nodded, avoiding his eyes. "Thank you for last night, but I have to go. I don't want to cause you any more trouble." Martin set down the coffee and pulled out a business card. "If you need help, legal advice, work, anything, call me," he said. "I know people who might need someone like you." Marcella stared at the card. Part of her wanted to tear it up and walk away. But something in Martins's eyes made her take it. "Thank you," she whispered before heading to the door. Martins didn't try to stop her. He just watched her walk away, worried about what would happen to her on the streets. The day was a nightmare. Marcella walked through the snow-covered city, stopping at every hospital and clinic. She carried her wrinkled resume like a prayer, but every door slammed shut in her face. The lawsuit had destroyed her reputation. No one would hire the crazy doctor who had attacked one of the city's most powerful hospitals. By evening, Marcella was broken. She had no money, no food, and nowhere to sleep. Her feet carried her back to Martins's building without her even realizing it. She sat on the front steps, curled up against the cold. She hadn't come to beg. She just needed a moment to rest before facing another night on the streets. Upstairs, Martins was working late when his security camera alert went off. He looked at the screen and his heart sank. Marcella was sitting on his steps, small and alone in the falling snow. He grabbed his coat and rushed downstairs. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice full of concern. "Come inside. It's freezing." Marcella shook her head, but her body was giving up. "I don't want to be trouble," she whispered. "You're not trouble," Martin said gently. "Come on, let me at least make you some tea." This time, Marcella was too tired to fight. She followed him inside, grateful for his warmth, but hating that she needed it. A week later, Marcella had moved into a small room in Martins's building. She hated depending on him, but she used the time to rest and heal. Martins never made her feel like a charity case. He just gave her space and time to find her strength. "I used to be a doctor," Marcella finally told him one morning over coffee. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I worked at Chicago General until I lost everything. Now I'm just this." She gestured at her worn clothes with a bitter smile. Martins listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said simply, "You did the right thing. That doesn't make you a failure." Marcella wanted to believe him, but the wounds were still too fresh. That night, Marcella worked on job applications until her eyes burned. She applied to community health centers, places that might not care about her ruined reputation. Each application was a tiny spark of hope, but also a reminder of how far she had fallen. Meanwhile, Martins made a phone call to an old friend who ran a nonprofit medical clinic in downtown Chicago. "She's a good doctor," he said. "She's been through hell, but she has a big heart. Just give her a chance." He didn't tell Marcella about the call. He knew she wanted to stand on her own, and he respected that. But sometimes a little help at the right moment could change everything. The Chicago Community Health Clinic sat on a rough street, where broken buildings mixed with shiny new towers. The clinic's paint was peeling, and the sign by the door was faded and cracked. Inside, the narrow hallways smelled of disinfectant and old rain. The waiting room was crowded with plastic chairs and worn-out people. The medical equipment was ancient. Blood pressure machines that wheezed, stethoscopes worn smooth from years of use. Everything was rough, humble, and falling apart. Marcella's old hospital had been a palace of gleaming marble floors, the newest machines, and wealthy patients. Doctors there wore spotless white coats and were treated like royalty. She had once been proud to walk those halls. Now she stood in this broken-down clinic, holding a battered stethoscope, feeling like she had been thrown into the gutter. At first, Marcella worked grudgingly, just trying to survive each day. Every time she treated a homeless person or prescribed medicine for someone who couldn't afford it, she felt ashamed. She thought she had been demoted, that all her years of study meant nothing. But then small moments began to change her. An old man took her hand after she checked his heart. "You're the first person who really listened to me," he said with tears in his cloudy eyes. A homeless boy smiled so bright when she bandaged his cut and gave him a piece of candy that Marcella found herself smiling back. "I'm doing something that matters," she realized. And for the first time, the thought didn't hurt. The clinic didn't have the fancy equipment of her old hospital, but it had something better, real compassion. The nurses smiled at patients even when they were exhausted. Volunteers worked for free because they cared. Marcella began to see that she hadn't fallen down in the world. She had found her true calling. Martins often stopped by after work, bringing coffee and pastries. "You look better," he said one day, watching her smile at a patient. "This place suits you." Marcella just shrugged, but she knew he was right. And his presence was like an anchor, reminding her that she wasn't alone. One night, Marcella joined the clinic's street outreach team. They walked through dark alleys and under bridges, giving blankets and medical care to people living in the shadows. Martin showed up unexpectedly with a bag of clean blankets from his office. "I heard you needed extra hands," he said with that gentle smile. They stopped under a streetlight where the paint was peeling off an old building. Marcella sat down with a cup of hot coffee Martins had brought her, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. As they sat there listening to the wind and distant traffic, Marcella finally opened up about her past. "I made a mistake," she whispered, staring into her coffee. "Not because I did the wrong thing, but because I was too naive." She took a shaky breath. "I blew the whistle on the hospital leadership. They were faking research data and ignoring patients who couldn't pay. I thought if I spoke up, it would change things. But they were stronger. They framed me, took my license, sued me for everything I had. My friends turned their backs on me like I was poison." Her voice broke, but she didn't cry. The grief had dried up, leaving only bitterness. Martins listened with steady eyes full of quiet understanding. "You weren't wrong," he said firmly. "You chose the harder path, and that makes you stronger than they'll ever be." Marcella let out a dry laugh. "Strong? All I see is failure." "You're here saving lives," Martin said. "If that's not strength, I don't know what is." He smiled, and in that moment, Marcella felt a small light flicker in her chest. Not just hope, but the knowledge that she still mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping me find where I belong." Weeks later, Marcella and Martins worked side by side in his office late into the night. Martins was handling a case about fake drugs that had killed dozens of people, and he needed Marcella's medical expertise. "I want you to be my expert witness," he said, sliding a file toward her. "This case involves a pharmaceutical company that sold fake medication. Only a doctor like you can fully understand what happened." Marcella touched the file with trembling fingers. She was honored by his trust, but afraid her damaged reputation would hurt his case. "Are you sure?" she asked. "My record isn't clean. They'll use it against you." Martin smiled with complete confidence. "I don't care about your record, Marcella. I care about the truth, and I know you can help us find it." Those long nights brought them closer. They sat shoulder to shoulder, studying documents by the computer's glow. Marcella explained complex medical terms while Martins figured out how to present them in court. Between piles of files and cups of cold coffee, they began sharing their stories. Marcella told him about her dreams of saving lives. Martin spoke about his first cases and why he decided to defend people crushed by the system. Their feelings grew quietly. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it. It was there in the way Martins's eyes lingered on Marcella's face, in how she smiled without thinking when he spoke. It was in the gentle way he touched her shoulder for encouragement, and how her fingers brushed his when she passed him papers. One foggy evening, Martins insisted on walking Marcella to her car. Under the dim streetlight, he stopped and gently took her hand. "Marcella," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "thank you for helping me, and I'm glad you're here." Marcella felt her heart racing. The warmth of his touch melted away the last of her walls. For a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Martin squeezed her hand lightly, his eyes uncertain as if wrestling with his feelings. Then he let go with a reluctant smile. "Drive safe," he said. As Marcella drove away, she saw him in her mirror, still standing there until the fog swallowed him up. She didn't know exactly what was growing between them, but for the first time in forever, she didn't feel alone. The courtroom was packed when the fake drug trial ended. Sunlight poured through tall windows as the judge's gavel came down with a loud crack. They had won. The pharmaceutical company was ordered to pay millions to the victims. Marcella stood quietly in the corner wearing her simple white coat, her dark hair pulled back. When the applause erupted, Martins's eyes immediately found hers. He was wearing his best suit, and his rare smile was bright with pride. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around them with flashing cameras. Headlines spread like wildfire. Attorney Martins Thompson and Dr. Marcella Martinez exposed drug scandal. For the first time in months, Marcella's name was being spoken with respect. But the victory was short-lived. Hours later, her old hospital launched a vicious attack. Lies spread across social media and tabloid websites. Dr. Marcella Martinez, mentally unstable. Can her testimony be trusted? They used old photos of Marcella from her worst days, when she was broken and homeless. Every headline felt like a knife reopening wounds she thought had healed. Marcella sat curled up in her small office at the clinic, reading the attacks on her phone. The past came flooding back like a tidal wave. The interrogations, the suspicious stares, the loneliness when the world turned away. "They will never let me be," she thought, tears sliding down her cheeks. A knock at the door made her jump. Martin stepped in, his coat wet from the rain, his eyes full of concern. "I saw the news," he said. "Don't read it alone." He sat beside her and took the phone from her hands. They read every cruel headline together. Martins didn't say much, only breaking the silence to murmur, "This is a lie, or they have no evidence." Hours passed in silence. Finally, Marcella buried her face in her hands. "I'm so tired, Martins. I just want to disappear. I can't keep fighting like this." Martins didn't answer right away. Then he laid a gentle hand on her shoulder and drew her into his arms. Marcella stiffened for a moment before letting herself sink into his embrace. "You don't have to go anywhere," he whispered. "I'm here, Marcella. I won't let you be alone." She looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting his. In that moment, every barrier between them seemed to vanish. Martins lowered his head and kissed her gently. Their first kiss was trembling and full of longing. Two lost souls finally finding each other. When they parted, Martins kept holding her. "We'll get through this," he said firmly. Marcella didn't reply, only nodded. In his arms, she felt a flicker of light. Not enough to erase the past, but enough to keep fighting. Light poured across Martins's desk as he pushed a legal document toward Marcella. "I'm going to be your attorney," he said with steel in his voice. "We're going to sue your old hospital and clear your name." Marcella's eyes went wide with shock. "Sue them? Martins, you know how powerful they are. They have money connections. They won't stop." Fear surged through her like ice water. The thought of facing the hospital again, the place that had destroyed her life, made her want to run and hide. Martins leaned forward, locking his eyes onto hers. "They're strong, but they're not invincible. You survived this once, and you're stronger than they ever believed. You deserve to have your honor restored, Marcella. Not just for you, but for the patients you tried to protect." The media pressure got worse when Martins announced the lawsuit. Reporters crowded outside the clinic with flashing cameras. New articles appeared questioning Marcella's motives and twisting her past. One morning, a reporter blocked Marcella's path as she left the clinic, shoving a microphone in her face. "Dr. Martinez, are you really mentally unstable like the hospital claims?" Marcella froze, her heart pounding, but she kept her head down and pushed through the crowd. Night after night, Marcella barely slept. She sat alone reading the attacks, each one feeling like another blade. She wanted to quit, to tell Martins she didn't have the strength. But every time she opened her mouth to give up, the look in his eyes stopped her. He never pressured her, but his presence was a steady reminder that she wasn't alone. One evening, as they sat surrounded by legal files and cold coffee, Marcella broke down. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she whispered. "Maybe I should just disappear and let it all end." Martins knelt beside her chair, so his eyes were level with hers. "You don't have to disappear," he said fiercely. "You deserve to have your name cleared, and I'll be here every step of the way." Marcella drew a shaky breath and wiped her tears. "All right," she whispered. "I'll stand in court. I'll tell the truth." The morning of the trial, Marcella stood before her mirror adjusting her white medical coat. She looked at her reflection and saw not a victim, but a survivor. She was a doctor, a fighter, and she was ready to face her past. In the courtroom, Marcella stepped up to the witness stand. Her voice was shaky at first, but grew clear and strong. She told everything: how the hospital had faked research data, neglected poor patients, and framed her to cover their crimes. Each word she spoke cut through the hospital's lies like a sword. Martins guided her with careful questions, his eyes never leaving hers, silently promising he wouldn't let her fall. Slowly, public opinion began to shift. New headlines praised Marcella's courage. "Young doctor takes on powerful hospital." People who had believed the lies started supporting her. Patients from the community clinic shared their stories, calling her the doctor for the forgotten. When the judge delivered the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. This court finds Dr. Marcela Martinez not guilty of all accusations. Her medical license is hereby fully restored. The gavel struck like thunder, ending the darkest chapter of Marcela's life. The courtroom erupted in applause, but Marcela just sat frozen, unable to believe it was over. She turned to Martins, tears streaming down her face. He reached for her hand under the table. "You did it," he whispered. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded around them with flashing cameras and shouting questions. Marcela's breath caught as the old fear returned. Martins stepped forward, shielding her from the chaos. He raised his hand, and his deep voice cut through the noise. Dr. Marcela Martinez is not just a victim of a corrupt system. She is someone who had the courage to stand up for the truth. She is the finest doctor I have ever known, and the woman I love. His words rippled through the crowd, bringing stunned silence. Marcela stared up at him, her eyes wide with emotion. His declaration was like a flame melting the last ice around her heart. She couldn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. In Martins's arms, she felt safe, loved, and seen for who she truly was. "We did it, Marcela," he whispered into her hair. As they walked away hand in hand, the sunlight fell across their faces like a promise of new beginnings.